finishing out World War II, talking about some post-war stuff, and yeah, so we got some post-war conferences. We got some war crimes that are going to have to be paid that were committed, and we got the beginning of the Cold War era. So that's kind of my big point today. Is my big point today is going to try to get you to understand like how World War II ends, and it causes the Cold War feelings to happen. And the Cold War was a time. It's called a Cold War because there was no actual like real fighting, even though there was. Which yeah, whatever. Um, but for the most part, it was just the threat of nuclear warfare, atomic warfare, all that kind of stuff, and not as many battles. So really, how World War II wraps up is the reason that we have that Cold War tension that goes on through all the 50s, the 60s, even into the 70s. So let's kind of back up here and start from a couple things we covered last time. All right, so this is July 1941, so we went way past this. We've already been past this. So put you in perspective here. This is before D-Day. All right, we covered D-Day a long time ago as far as like how the battle was won. But this is in July 1941, and this is important to remember because this is not fighting. This is not a battle that happened on the World War II European front or Japanese front. This was an Atlantic Charter where there was this secret meeting that really nobody knew about between Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, obviously of the United Kingdom. And they kind of come up with this pact. So this is the British and this is the United States. And this is kind of like this long-term marriage forming, right? Where FDR and Churchill kind of talked about what needed to happen after this war was won. So really they were looking into the future and talking about how things need to be and how things need to change once World War II was won by the Allied forces, which obviously it was. But in no way, shape, or form was it, is set in stone before this point. Once again, let me point you back to the date, 1941. I mean, that's not just before D-Day. It's before like Pearl Harbor. It's before the United States even entering the war officially. So yeah, that conversation was had by FDR and Winston Churchill. So okay, then we kind of fast forward a little bit. A couple things about that Atlantic Charter. Basically, once the war was over, Churchill and FDR said, "Hey, this cannot be about territorial gains. This can't be about you guys gaining countries, us gaining land, us gaining influence. Has to be about peace. Has to be about long-term sustained peace. All nations to choose their own government." Now, of course, here's the big problem we have with that, right? Like, of course, the United States and of course Britain is going to agree that all nations that are formed or cut up after this war should be able to choose their own government. Who is not going to agree with that? Freaking Stalin. Stalin's not going to agree with that, okay? Because obviously he is wanting some kind of buffer zone, some Soviet satellite states to kind of protect him from Germany going crazy again, because it basically has two times in the past, 50 years here, right? So look at the World War II casualties here really quick. We actually talked about this before we even went to virtual learning. We actually talked about this at the beginning of World War II. And I told you, just looking at these numbers, they're staggering, right? Like the Soviet Union lost 7 million, okay, civilians. That's not even soldiers. And then the Soviet Union, 11 million military personnel dead. So you're talking about almost 20 million people just wiped out, okay? That's staggering. That's not just an entire generation. That's like multiple generations of people, just gone. Obviously, all countries sustained heavy deaths and losses, but Soviet Union really stands out to you, which kind of shows you why they are so passionate about. And we're going to be into this big time when we talk about, the Cold War era. They are going to be all about building a buffer zone between them and the rest of Western Europe, right? Like they have been burned two times by Germany being at its doorstep and being able to just march right into the Soviet Union or Russia or whatever you want to call it, right? Depending on the time frame, and and they've had to fight them back two times, suffering huge casualties in the process. So that's what makes this so important. Okay, so let's go to these post-war conferences. Going to make this pretty quick. There were several major ones. I'm going to point out two or three here. Okay, the Yalta Conference I feel like is a very important one for you guys to understand and know. This was one of the big three conferences, right? And the big three conferences means we have all the main Allied leaders there taking part in this conference. So at this particular conference, it was Churchill from Great Britain. It was Roosevelt from the United States. It was Stalin from Soviet Union. So the Yalta Conference, those three get together. It's held in 1945. Allies are very close to victory at this point on the European front, right? Still have Japan to deal with. And the main things that they talked about was the goal for post-war Europe. And they started to get these ideas about how Germany should be broken up. And what they kind of come to a conclusion of is it should be broken up into certain parts. And certain parts should be controlled by the main Allied nations, right? So a part of Germany should be controlled by the Soviet Union. A part of Germany should be controlled by the United States. A part of Germany should be controlled by Great Britain. So Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill kind of all agree on this. Stalin will kind of renege on some of these promises that he makes because one that he made in this Yalta conference was he made the promise about free elections, mainly in Poland. We're talking about Poland right here because obviously Great Britain wants Poland to be free. And Stalin has already set up a communist government in Poland, and he says that he's going to allow them to make free elections on what kind of the government they want. That's not going to happen. Okay. The other one I wanted to talk to you guys about is one we mentioned last class, last virtual lesson. We kind of talked about the United Nations a little bit, but the big thing that I left out detail-wise was like Stalin agreed to fight against Japan once the war in Europe was over, and that was the big thing that the United States was worried about because the United States knew it was going to have to go to war with Japan, even after Nazi Germany was beat, even after the European front was closed out. And we were worried about how we were going to do that. And we thought that we were going to have the Soviet Union's help with that. Turns out, with the atomic bomb and the Manhattan Project coming to fruition, we didn't. But at the same time, we thought we were going to need their help, and they actually agreed to it. So you see how all these conferences work, right? It's give and take. And the Soviet Union also would join this United Nations, organization. Big thing the United Nations was supposed to do was prevent war. But as I mentioned last time and last class, the Security Council, which this was kind of secretive to be honest, like the Security Council, which was made up of some of those big players, especially allied nations, right, had veto power, right? And veto power means like if even one of those countries says, we don't want to do this, then the United Nations could not take that action. That becomes pretty significant because these three right here, United States, Great Britain, and Soviet Union, regardless of who the leaders are not going to agree on everything. And just one of them saying no makes it not happen. Okay. Moving on, this is the last one that we'll talk about. This is slide 4 right here. The Potsdam Conference. This was in July 1945. So once again, we're approaching the end of the war. This is not that long after Yalta. And the Potsdam Conference between Soviet Union and other allies, the countries stay the same, but the people don't, right? So by this point, FDR has passed away. Harry Truman is now the President of the United States. He attends the Potsdam Conference. Also, Winston Churchill is no longer in charge of Great Britain. So you have these three people meeting up, and it is different players, but Stalin is still there, and Stalin is the one who has already kind of started some of these lies, and he will not. He'll just create more lies this time around. So by this point, there is a real worry between the United States, Great Britain, against Soviet Union about the spread of communism and Soviet influence. Like they are very worried about Stalin trying to set up this buffer zone, right? These satellite nations, and we're going to get more into this. But basically, the problem was we just got two different points of view here, right? Like Soviet Union is trying to do what's best for them, and it is what's best for them to set up a buffer zone. They've been burned, like I said earlier, 2 times in the last 50 years by not having that buffer zone, and they were able to march right into Soviet Union, Germany. I'm talking about. And the United States and Great Britain, we do not want that communist bloc. We don't want that idea of communism to spread because we are completely anti-communism. We are capitalist, right? We are democracy, power of the people. So, the Potsdam Conference brings out more lies. Stalin completely reneges on allowing places like Poland to have those free elections that we talked about at Yalta. And it became very apparent very quickly that Stalin was not going to let go of the influence and the Soviet communist power that he had set up in Poland, and he was going to start this, this communist bloc, or what we're going to talk about, a buffer zone in Eastern Europe. Okay, So let's move on here to war crimes. All right, this is something that happens once the war is over. During World War II, the Axis powers, we're talking mainly Nazi Germany here, but also Japan and some other places, repeatedly violated the Geneva Convention. So let's talk about what the Geneva Conventions are really quick. The Geneva Conventions was this set of rules that we set up about what you can and can't do to captured prisoners in wartime, how they should be treated, what you could and couldn't do to somebody who, say, maybe their plane went down in enemy territory and they were captured prisoners of war, that kind of thing. And it was repeatedly broken, probably by all sides. Let's just be honest. But the winners get to make the rules, right? So the Allied powers went after the Axis powers who violated these rules. So mainly, we're talking about the Nazi leaders here. A couple pictures of Adolf Eichmann. We know we can't put Hitler on trial. I mentioned that on last lecture. Because he had killed himself. But the rest of these Nazi guys, the rest of these henchmen, right, Hitler's right-hand men, they could be prosecuted for their crimes, and most of them were, right? And that is in a conference, not conference, but the Nuremberg trials, this court case that had set up for all these people who had committed war crimes in our eyes. All right, let's get to the Truman Doctrine. So you guys know Harry Truman is the president that succeeds FDR. Harry Truman said the United States should help any country that was threatened by communism and the Soviet Union. Oh boy, okay. So as soon as that statement is made, which he delivers to Congress in a speech in 1947, so this is post-war now, right? He is specifically speaking about Greece and Turkey. And Greece and Turkey are in that sphere of Soviet influence at this time, and we don't think they should be. We think they should be able to make up their own government and have free elections, and that is not happening. So Harry Truman makes kind of a bold step here and says United States should help any country, any nation that is threatened by communism, the Soviets, and we don't feel like they want to be communism. So what does help them mean? What does we should aid them mean? Does that mean we're going to send military in? Does that mean we're just going to send money in or maybe weapons? That's where it gets very muddy, right? So Greece and Turkey, we sent a lot of money and a lot of arms in. We sent about $400 million, dumped about $400 million into trying to keep Greece and Turkey free, and it didn't happen. So the Soviets basically saw this as an open declaration of what we're eventually going to call the Cold War, the tensions between the United States and Russia, or Soviet Union. So this policy is basically one that Truman was a big believer in, and this was the policy of containment. And containment meant we should hold Soviet power and communism to where it already exists and no further. Because, and here's the give and take I was telling you about. Here's the Soviets and their ideas and the United States and their ideas being different, right? Soviet viewpoint. Here's what the Soviets believe. We need a Soviet communist buffer zone between us and Germany, right? We are not going to get burned by the aggression of Eastern European nations again. We've been burned by it, like I've said, 3 times now. 3 times. Twice in the last 50 years. We're not going to let it happen again. Okay, so we're going to set up this sphere of influence, these satellite states, whatever you want to call them. The United States view is one that is much different, right? Like, we believe countries are being controlled by Germany, or sorry, not Germany, Soviet Union, and we have to protect them, like, because they don't want to be communism. Why? Who would want to be communism? Nobody wants to be communism. That's our belief in the United States. So we are going to go in and help them be free, because that's what we are. So we think everybody should be that way. So once countries start falling, when's it going to stop? That was the fear of the United States. The fear of the United States, and the reason that we kind of follow this policy of containment, is the domino theory, right? Like, if one country falls, all the countries are going to fall, and pretty much one by one, this domino effect is going to take up all of Europe, and we're all going to be threatened by all these Soviet countries that are under the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. So you can see the 2 big different theories here, and this is going to turn into an arms race, because not too far after World War II ends, you're going to have a bunch of spies that are busted. We'll talk about that next class. And the Soviet Union is going to get atomic weaponry real quick. We know that the United States already has it. We're the first one to have it. And then what's going to happen is this huge atomic and nuclear arms race, and a military buildup, trying to basically flex on the other country, right? Like, Soviet Union and the United States are going to get into a match to see who is the bigger, badder, most armed country. So that's where we're going next time, guys. Hope you enjoyed this time. I'll see you next class.